Welcome back to our next chapters from Matilda. We're going to get to read two more chapters, and we're going to learn a little bit more about Matilda's family and to understand her a little bit better because of how she's been raised in her family and because of how she's been treated in her family. So we're also going to get to hear her pull a little bit more revenge on her family members because of how she's been treated as well. So here we go with the chapter called The Ghost. There was a comparative calm in the Wormwood household for about a week after the superglue episode. The experience had clearly chastened Mr. Wormwood, and he seemed temporarily to have lost his taste for boasting and bullying. Then, suddenly, he struck again. Perhaps he had had a bad day at the garage and had not sold enough crummy second-hand cars. There are many things that can make a man irritable when he arrives home from work in the evening, and a sensible wife will usually notice a storm signal and will leave him alone until he simmers down. When Mr. Wormwood arrived back from the garage that evening, his face was as dark as thundercloud, and somebody was clearly for the high jump pretty soon. His wife recognized the signs immediately and made herself scarce. He then strode into the living room. Matilda happened to be curled up in an armchair in the corner, totally absorbed in a book. Mr. Wormwood switched on the television. The screen lit up. The program blared. Mr. Wormwood glared at Matilda. She hadn't moved. She had somehow trained herself by now to block her ears to the ghastly sound of the dreaded box. She kept right on reading, and for some reason this infuriated the father. Perhaps his anger was intensified because he saw her getting pleasure from something that was beyond his reach. "Don't you ever stop reading," he snapped at her. "Oh, hello, Daddy," she said pleasantly. "Did you have a good day?" "What is this trash?" he said, snatching the book from her hands. "It isn't trash, Daddy. It's lovely. It's called The Red Pony. It's by John Steinbeck, an American writer. Why don't you try it? You'll love it." "Filth," Mr. Wormwood said. "If it's by an American, it's certain to be filth. That's all they write about." "No, Daddy, it's beautiful. Honestly, it is. It's about—" "I don't want to know what it's about," Mr. Wormwood barked. "I'm fed up with your reading anyway. Go and find yourself something useful to do." With frightening suddenness, he now began ripping the pages out of the book in handfuls and throwing them into the waste paper basket. Matilda froze in horror. The father kept going. There seemed little doubt that the man felt some kind of jealousy. How dare she, he seemed to be saying with each rip of the page, how dare she enjoy reading books when he couldn't? How dare she? "That's a library book," Matilda cried. "It doesn't belong to me. I have to return it to Mrs. Phelps." "Then you'll have to buy another one, won't you?" the father said, still tearing out pages. "You'll have to save your pocket money until there's enough in the kitty to buy a new one for your precious Mrs. Phelps, won't you?" With that, he dropped the now empty covers of the book onto the basket and marched out of the room, leaving the telly blaring. Most children in Matilda's place would have burst into a flood of tears. She didn't do this. She sat there very still and white and thoughtful. She seemed to know that neither crying nor sulking ever got anyone anywhere. The only sensible thing to do when you're attacked is, as Napoleon once said, to counterattack. Matilda's wonderfully subtle mind was already at work devising yet another suitable punishment for the poisonous parent. The plan was now beginning to hatch in her mind, and it depended, however, on whether or not Fred's parrot was really as good a talker as Fred made it out. Fred was a friend of Matilda's. He was a small boy of 6 who lived just around the corner from her, and for days he had been going on about this great talking parrot his father had given him. So the following afternoon, as soon as Mrs. Wormwood had departed in her car for another session of bingo, Matilda set out for Fred's house to investigate. She knocked on his door and asked if he would be kind enough to show her the famous bird. Fred was delighted and led her up to his bedroom where the truly magnificent blue and yellow parrot sat in a tall cage. "There it is," Fred said. "Its name is Chopper." "Make it talk," Matilda said. "You can't make it talk," Fred said. "You have to be patient. It'll talk when it feels like it." They hung around, waiting. Suddenly, the parrot said, "Hello, hello, hello." It was exactly like a human voice. Matilda said, "That's amazing. What else can it say?" "Rattle my bones," the parrot said, giving a wonderful imitation of a spooky voice. "Rattle my bones." "He's always saying that," Fred told her. "What else can he say?" Matilda asked. "That's about it," Fred said. "But it's pretty marvelous, don't you think?" It's fabulous, Matilda said. Will you lend him to me for just one night? No, Fred said. Certainly not. I'll give you all my next week's pocket money, Matilda said. That was different. Fred thought about it for a few seconds. All right, then, he said, if you promise to return him tomorrow. Matilda staggered back to her own empty house, carrying the tall cage in both hands. There was a large fireplace in the dining room, and she now set about wedging the cage up the chimney and out of sight. It wasn't so easy, but she managed it in the end. There's a picture of her doing that. Hello, 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 the bird called down to her. Hello, hello. Shut up, you nut, Matilda said, and she went out to wash the soot off her hands. That evening, while the mother, the father, the brother, and Matilda were having supper as usual in the living room in front of the television, a voice came loud and clear from the dining room across the hall. Hello, 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 it said. Harry, the mother cried, turning white. There's someone in the house. I heard a voice. So did I, the brother said. Matilda jumped up and switched off the telly. Shh, she said. Listen. They all stopped eating and sat there very tense, listening. Hello, 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 came the voice again. There it is, cried the brother. It's burglars, hissed the mother. They're in the dining room. I think they are, the father said, sitting tight. Then go and catch them, Harry, hissed the mother. Go out and collar them red-handed. The father didn't move. He seemed in no hurry to dash off and be a hero. His face had turned gray. Get on with it, hissed the mother. They're probably after the silver. The husband wiped his lips nervously with his napkin. Why don't we all go and look together, he said. Come on, then, the brother said. Come on, Mom. They're definitely in the dining room, Matilda whispered. I'm sure they are. The mother grabbed the poker from the fireplace. The father took the golf club that was standing in the corner. The brother seized the table lamp, ripping the plug out of its socket. Matilda took the knife that she'd been eating with, and all four of them crept toward the dining room, the father keeping well behind the others. Hello, 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 came the voice again. Come on, Matilda cried as she burst into the room, brandishing the knife. Stick 'em up, she yelled. We've caught you. The others followed her, waving their weapons. They stopped. They stared around the room. There was no one there. There's no one here, the father said, greatly relieved. I heard him, Harry, the mother shrieked, still quaking. I distinctly heard his voice. So did you. I'm certain I heard him, Matilda cried. He's in here somewhere. She began searching behind the sofa and behind the curtains. Then came a voice again, soft and spooky this time. Rattle my bones, it said. Rattle my bones. They all jumped, including Matilda, who was a pretty good actress. They stared around the room. There was still no one there. It's a ghost, Matilda said. Heaven help us, cried the mother, clutching her husband around the neck. I know it's a ghost, Matilda said. I've heard it here before. This room is haunted. I thought you knew. Save us, said the mother, as she almost throttled her husband. I'm getting out of here, the father said, grayer than ever now, and they all fled, slamming the door behind them. The next afternoon, Matilda managed to get a rather sooty and grumpy parrot down from the chimney and out of the house without being seen. She carried it through the back door and ran with it all the way to Fred's house. Did it behave itself? Fred asked her. We had a lovely time with it, Matilda said. My parents adored it. That's the end of that chapter, and we'll move on to a chapter called Arithmetic. Matilda longed for her parents to be good and loving and understanding and honorable and intelligent. The fact that they were none of these things was something that she had to put up with. It was not easy to do so. But the new game she had invented of punishing one or both of them each time that they were beastly to her made her life more or less bearable. Being very small and very young, the only power Matilda had over anyone in her family was brain power. For sheer cleverness, she could run rings around all of them. But the fact remained that any 5-year-old girl in any family was almost always obliged to do as she was told, however asinine the orders might be. Thus, it was always forced. Thus, she was always forced to eat her evening meals out of TV dinner trays in front of a dreaded box. She always had to stay alone on weekday afternoons, and whenever she was told to shut up, she had to shut up. Her safety valve, the thing that prevented her from going round the bend, was the fun of devising and dishing out these splendid punishments, and the lovely thing was that they seemed to work, at any rate, for short periods. The father, in particular, became less cocky and unbearable for several days after receiving a dose of Matilda's magic medicine. The parrot in the chimney affair quite definitely cooled both her parents down a lot. For over a week, they were comparatively civil to their small daughter. But alas, this couldn't last. The next flare-up came one evening in the sitting room. Mr. Wormwood had just returned from work. Matilda and her brother were sitting quietly on the sofa, waiting for their mother to bring the TV dinners on a tray. The television had not yet been switched on. In came Mr. Wormwood in a loud checkered suit and yellow tie. The appalling broad orange and green check of the jacket and the trousers almost blinded the onlooker. He looked like a low-grade bookmaker dressed up for his daughter's wedding. And he was very clearly pleased with himself this evening. He sat down in the armchair and rubbed his hands together and addressed his son in a loud voice. "Well, my boy," he said, "your father's had a most successful day. He is a lot richer tonight than he was this morning. He has sold no less than 5 cars, each one at a tidy profit. Sawdust in the gearboxes, the electric drill on the speedometer cables, a splash of paint here and there, and a few other clever little tricks, and these idiots were all falling over themselves to buy." He fished a bit of paper out of his pocket and studied it. "Listen, boy," he said, addressing the son and ignoring Matilda. "Seeing as you'll be going into this business with me one day, you've got to know how to add up the profits you make at the end of each day. Go ahead and get your pad and pencil, and let's see how clever you are." The son obediently left the room and returned with the writing materials. "Write these figures down," the father said, reading from the bits of paper. "Car number 1 was bought by me for £278. Pounds are like dollars, guys, but just over in the United Kingdom, in England. And sold for 1,425. Got that?" The 10-year-old boy wrote down 2 separate amounts. He wrote them slowly and carefully. "Car number 2, the father went on, cost me £118 and sold for 460. Got it?" "Yes, Dad," the son said. "I've got that." "Car number 3 cost me £111 and sold for £999 and 50 pence. "Say that again," the son said. "How much did it sell for?" £999 and 50 pence, the father said. "And that, by the way, is another of my nifty little tricks to diddle the customer. Never ask for a big round figure. Always go just below it. Never say £1,000. Always say 999 and 50. It sounds much less, but it isn't. Clever, isn't it?" "Very," the son said. "You're brilliant, Dad." "Car number 4 cost me £86, a real wreck that was, and sold for £699.50. "Not too fast," the son said, writing the numbers down. "Right, I've got it. Car number 5 cost £637 and sold for £1,649.50. You've got those figures written down, son?" "Yes, Daddy," the boy said, crouching over his pad carefully writing. "Very well," the father said. "Now work out the profit I made on each of the 5 cars and add up the total. Then you'll be able to tell me how much money your rather brilliant father made altogether today." "That's a lot of sums," the boy said. "Of course that's a lot of sums," the father answered. "But when you're in a big business like I am, you've got to be hot stuff at arithmetic. I've practically got a computer inside my head. It took me less than 10 minutes to work out the whole thing." "You mean you did that in your head, Dad?" the son asked. "Well, not exactly," the father said. "Nobody could do that. But it didn't take me long. When you've finished, tell me what you think the profit was for the day. I've got the final total written down, and I'll tell you if you're right." Matilda said quietly, "Dad, you made exactly £4,303 and 50 pence altogether." "Don't butt in," the father said. "Your brother and I are busy with high finance." "But, Dad." Shut up, the father said. Stop guessing and trying to be clever. Look at your answer, Dad, Matilda said gently. If you've done it right, it ought to be 4,303 pounds and 50 pence. Is that what you've got, Dad? The father glanced down at the paper in his hands. He seemed to stiffen. He became very quiet. There was silence. Then he said, Say that again. 4,303 pounds 50, Matilda said. There was another silence. The father's face was beginning to go dark red. I'm sure it's right, Matilda said. You little cheat, the father suddenly shouted, pointing at her with his finger. You looked at my bit of paper. You read it off what I've gotten written here. Daddy, I'm on the other side of the room, Matilda said. How could I possibly see it? Don't give me that rubbish, the father shouted. Of course you looked. You must have looked. No one in the world could give the right answer like that, especially a girl. You're a little cheat, madam. That's what you are, a cheat and a liar. At that point, the mother came in carrying a large tray on which there were 4 suppers. This time it was fish and chips, which Mrs. Wormwood had picked up at the fish and chip shop on her way home from bingo. It seemed that bingo afternoons left her so exhausted, both physically and emotionally, that she never had enough energy left to cook an evening meal. So if it wasn't TV dinners, it had to be fish and chips. What are you looking so red in the face about, Harry? She said as she put the tray down on the coffee table. Your daughter's a cheat and a liar, the father said, taking his plate of fish and placing it on his knees. Turn the telly on and let's not have any more talk. And that is the end of that chapter. I hope you enjoyed it. And let's get our discussion going in the comment section and see what we think of how the characters in this book are developing and if we can make any comparisons to characters we've read in other books. Have a great day, guys.